The morning Anna left, everything seemed normal. That's what haunts me most, the ordinary nature of those last moments. I remember the steam rising from her coffee cup, the way she absently tucked her hair behind her ear while scrolling through her phone. Our kids, Sarah and Tommy, were arguing over who got the last chocolate chip waffle. Just another Tuesday in the Matthews household. I was focused on my laptop, finalizing designs for a client presentation. Anna mentioned something about taking the kids to their afternoon activities. Soccer for Tommy, ballet for Sarah. I nodded, only half listening. If I had known those were the last words we'd exchange, I would have looked up. I would have memorized every detail of her face, the exact tone of her voice, the way her wedding ring caught the morning light as she gathered her things. The first sign that something was wrong came at 6 p.m. when I returned home from work. The house was dark. No sounds of cartoons blaring from the living room TV. No aroma of dinner cooking. No children's laughter or bickering. Just silence. Heavy, oppressive silence that seemed to push against my chest as I walked through each empty room. I called Anna's cell, straight to voicemail. I texted. No response. I called the kids' instructors. Neither of them had shown up for their activities. My hands were shaking as I dialed our neighbors, friends, family members. Nobody had seen them. That night feels like a blur now. Detective Ramirez, sitting in our living room, his notepad open, asking questions I struggled to answer. Had there been any signs of trouble? Any unusual behavior? Any concerning conversations? I shook my head, feeling increasingly helpless. Our marriage wasn't perfect. Whose is? But it was stable. We had our routines, our comfortable silences, our shared dreams for the future. The days that followed were a nightmare of police reports, missing person posters, and endless speculation. I couldn't sleep in our bed anymore. The empty space beside me felt like a void that threatened to swallow me whole. I spent nights on the couch, scrolling through photos on my phone, searching for clues I might have missed. Lily, my best friend since college, practically moved in. She brought groceries, handled calls from concerned friends, and forced me to eat when I forgot. "You need to keep your strength up," she'd say, pushing a plate of food toward me. "They're going to need you when they come back." But as weeks turned into months, even Lily's unwavering optimism began to fade. I caught her watching me with concern when she thought I wasn't looking. The police investigation stalled. Anna's bank accounts remained untouched. Her passport hadn't been used. It was as if she and our children had simply vanished into thin air. I threw myself into work, taking on extra projects to fill the endless hours. My graphic design studio became my sanctuary, the only place where I could focus on something other than the gaping hole in my life. But even there, memories of Anna would ambush me. The logo sheet helped me brainstorm for my first major client. The family photos on my desk that I couldn't bring myself to put away. At night, when the house felt too quiet and too empty, I would sit in Sarah's room or Tommy's, touching their stuffed animals, reading their books, trying to keep their memories alive. Sometimes I'd find myself in our walk-in closet, breathing in the lingering scent of Anna's perfume on her clothes, wondering if I had somehow failed them all without realizing it. 3 months after they disappeared, I started seeing a therapist. Dr. Chin helped me navigate the crushing waves of grief, anger, and confusion. "It's okay not to have answers," she would tell me. "It's okay to feel lost." But how could it be okay when half of my family, my whole world, had disappeared without a trace? 6 months into their disappearance, I started noticing things I'd missed before, like how Anna had slowly emptied our joint account over several weeks, taking out small amounts that wouldn't raise suspicion, or how she'd organized all our important documents, birth certificates, passports, insurance papers, supposedly to get more organized. The signs were there, scattered like breadcrumbs, but I'd been too blind to see them. I remember the last time we made love, 2 weeks before she left. There was something different in her touch, a desperate quality I didn't understand at the time. Now I replay that night in my mind, wondering if she was already planning her escape, if each caress was a silent goodbye. Detective Ramirez kept calling with updates that weren't really updates. "We're exploring all possibilities," he'd say, his voice carrying the weight of too many similar cases. I started dreading his calls. each one chipping away at my hope. One evening, while sorting through old photos for the investigation, I found a journal hidden behind Anna's bedside table. The last entry was dated 3 months before she left. Sometimes I look at him and wonder if he sees me anymore. Really sees me. We've become so good at playing house that we've forgotten how to be us. The words hit me like a physical blow. I spent that night reading and rereading her entries, trying to piece together the woman I thought I knew with the one who wrote these words. There were mentions of feeling trapped, of yearning for something more, of dreams deferred. But nothing about leaving, nothing about taking our children. Lily found me the next morning, still clutching the journal, surrounded by scattered photos. "You need to eat something," she said, her voice gentle but firm. She'd taken to coming by every morning before work, making sure I hadn't completely fallen apart during the night. "Did you know?" I asked her, holding up the journal. "Did she ever tell you she was unhappy?" Lily's hesitation told me everything. She mentioned feeling disconnected, she finally admitted. "But John, lots of couples go through rough patches." I never thought. Her voice trailed off, but the unspoken words hung between us. None of us had thought Anna capable of this. The Anna we knew was responsible, devoted to our children, committed to our marriage. The Anna we knew wouldn't just vanish. Work became increasingly difficult. I'd catch myself staring at family photos on my desktop, analyzing every smile, every gesture, looking for hints of what was to come. My clients were understanding, but I could see their patience wearing thin as deadlines slipped and projects stalled. At night, I'd lie awake imagining scenarios. Maybe they were in danger. Maybe someone had forced them to leave. But the evidence, the careful planning, the gradual withdrawal of money, pointed to something more deliberate, something that made my stomach churn. The house felt like a museum of our life together. Tommy's half-finished Lego spaceship still sat on his desk. Sarah's ballet shoes hung by the door, waiting for feet that wouldn't fill them. Anna's coffee mug remained unwashed in the sink from that last morning. I couldn't bring myself to clean it, as if preserving this small piece of evidence would somehow bring them back. Dr. Chen suggested I join a support group for families of missing persons. The first meeting, I sat in the parking lot for an hour before driving home. I couldn't bear to hear other stories like mine, couldn't face the possibility that this limbo might stretch into years, decades even. Some of the group members had been searching for loved ones for over 20 years. The thought of living with this uncertainty for that long made it hard to breathe. The seasons changed, and with them, something inside me hardened. 9 months had passed, and the familiar ache of missing them had evolved into something darker. I started noticing things in our home that felt wrong, memories that didn't quite align with the story I'd told myself about our marriage. One Sunday morning, while cleaning out the garage, something Anna had always insisted on doing herself, I found a prepaid phone tucked behind old paint cans. The discovery sent me spiraling. I sat there on the concrete floor, surrounded by the dusty remnants of our life together, turning the phone over and over in my hands. The battery was dead, and part of me wondered if I really wanted to know what secrets it might hold. Lily came over that evening, bringing Chinese food and concern in equal measure. I showed her the phone, watching her face carefully for any sign of recognition. She maintained her composure, but something flickered in her eyes. Uncertainty, perhaps, or guilt. "I should have seen it coming," I said, pushing rice around my plate. All those times she insisted on handling certain things alone. The way she'd get defensive about her phone. The long hours she spent writing in coffee shops. Lily reached across the table, her hand warm against mine. "Stop torturing yourself, John. None of us saw this coming. Not even me, and I've known Anna since college." But her words felt hollow. I remembered a conversation from last summer. Anna and me sitting on our back porch after the kids had gone to bed. She'd been talking about her writing, about feeling stuck in her novel. "Sometimes I think about just running away," she'd said. "Starting fresh somewhere new." I'd laughed it off as writers talk. Now the memory made me nauseous. Detective Ramirez called less frequently now. Each conversation felt more like a formality than a real investigation. "Sometimes people don't want to be found," he said during our last call, his voice heavy with implications I wasn't ready to accept. I started going through our photos obsessively, creating a timeline of our relationship. The early days were full of spontaneous adventures. Weekend trips to the coast, midnight picnics, lazy Sundays spent reading in bed. Then came the kids, and with them, the comfortable routine of family life. In recent photos, I noticed how Anna's smile had changed. It no longer reached her eyes. She stood slightly apart from us in group shots, as if already preparing for her departure. Dr. Chen suggested I write letters to Anna and the kids, not to send, but to process my feelings. The words poured out of me, filling pages with anger, confusion, and a love that refused to die despite everything. I would have listened, I wrote to Anna. If you told me you were unhappy, I would have moved mountains to fix things. Why didn't you give us that chance? The letters to Sarah and Tommy were harder to write. How do you tell your children you don't know why their mother took them away? That you don't know if it was something you did, something you failed to do? One night, after too many glasses of wine, I found myself going through Anna's writing folders on our shared computer. Most were password protected, but I knew her patterns, important dates, favorite book characters. It took several attempts before I cracked one. Rebirth 2023. The contents made my blood run cold. Detailed research on disappearing, articles about starting over, notes about countries with lax extradition laws. The discovery of Anna's research folders changed everything. Each night, I found myself diving deeper into her digital footprint, watching our marriage unravel in reverse through cached web searches and saved documents. The woman I thought I knew dissolved with each click, replaced by someone more complex, more deliberate in her actions. I remember sitting in Tommy's room one night, holding his favorite dinosaur plush, when the first real wave of anger hit me. Not the desperate, confused anger of the early days, but something colder, more precise. The kids' rooms had become time capsules. Homework assignments still pinned to bulletin boards, calendar pages frozen on that last month. Sarah's journal lay open on her desk. The last entry, a complaint about math homework she'd never have to finish. Sleep became a stranger again. I'd wake in the dark hours, remembering small moments that now felt charged with different meaning. The way Anna had insisted on updating the children's passports just in case. How she'd encouraged me to take that week-long design conference in Seattle, then seemed disappointed when I declined. The careful way she documented all our family photos, creating digital backups for safekeeping. Lily noticed the change in me. "You're different," she said over coffee one morning, her eyes searching my face. "More real," I suggested, watching steam rise from my cup. "The thing is, Lily, I don't think I knew what was real before. I was living in a story I'd made up about my marriage, my wife, my life." She reached across the table, her fingers brushing mine in that way she had, offering comfort without words. But I pulled back. Touch felt dangerous now, laden with possibilities I wasn't ready to consider. That evening, I found myself parked outside the coffee shop where Anna used to write. Through the window, I could see the corner table she'd favored, now occupied by a young couple lost in conversation. They reminded me of Anna and me in our early days. The casual intimacy, the shared laughter, the way their hands kept finding each other across the table. I sat there until closing time, remembering all the evenings I'd picked her up from this spot. Had she really been writing? The thought of her sitting at that same table, planning her escape while I waited trustingly at home, made my chest tight with a pain that felt physical. The next therapy session with Dr. Chen was different. Instead of focusing on loss and grief, we talked about anger, about betrayal, about the way trauma reshapes not just our future but our past. "I keep thinking about the kids," I told her, my voice catching. Did she plan this with them? Did she prepare them somehow? Or did she just wake up one morning and decide to tear their world apart? Dr. Chen's response was measured, careful. Sometimes, when people feel trapped, they convince themselves that dramatic action is the only option. They might even believe they're doing what's best for everyone involved. That night, I opened Anna's journal again, reading it with new eyes. Between lines about feeling trapped and unfulfilled, I found something I'd missed before, a pattern of small deceptions, each one justified by her sense of disconnection. The weight of this realization kept me up until dawn, scrolling through years of photos on my phone, watching our smiles become more practiced, our poses more calculated, our eyes less connected. Winter settled over the city like a heavy blanket, bringing with it the first holidays without them. The empty house echoed with phantom sounds. Sarah's excitement over Christmas decorations, Tommy's endless questions about Santa, Anna's humming as she baked cookies. I found myself avoiding the storage boxes labeled holiday, unable to face the carefully wrapped ornaments we'd collected over the years, each one holding a memory that now felt like a beautiful lie. One evening, while attempting to work through a deadline, I discovered an old email thread between Anna and her writing group. The messages seemed innocent enough at first. Critiques of each other's work, plans for meetings, shared articles about publishing. But there was one name that appeared more frequently than others: Ethan. His responses to Anna's writing were always more detailed, more personal. He understood her characters in ways that made something twist inside my chest. I printed their exchanges, spreading them across our dining room table like pieces of a puzzle I wasn't sure I wanted to solve. The progression was subtle, literary discussions slowly bleeding into personal revelations, shared jokes becoming inside references, casual meetings for coffee extending into dinner plans with the group. I sat there until dawn, watching our marriage dissolve in timestamps and reply chains. Lily found me there, surrounded by paper and cold coffee. She'd started using her spare key more frequently, worried about my increasingly erratic behavior. The concern in her eyes when she saw the scattered emails made me wonder what else she knew, what other pieces of the puzzle she might be holding back. "You need to stop this," she said softly, gathering the papers into a neat stack. "You're torturing yourself. Did you ever meet him?" I asked, my voice rough from lack of sleep. This Ethan from her writing group? The slight hesitation before her denial told me everything and nothing. My hands shook as I poured more coffee, spilling some on the counter where Anna used to lean every morning, planning our day while the kids ate breakfast. That afternoon, I drove to the coffee shop where Anna's writing group used to meet. The barista recognized me. I'd picked Anna up here countless times. Her expression shifted when I asked about the group, about Ethan. "They stopped meeting here months ago," she said, avoiding my eyes. "Moved to some other place, I think." I sat at Anna's usual table, staring at the rain-streaked window, remembering all the times I'd watched her through it. She'd always seemed so focused, so absorbed in her writing. Had she been writing at all? Or had those hours been spent crafting something else entirely? The ghost of her perfume still lingered in our closet, mixing with the scent of mothballs and dust. I found myself standing there at odd hours, running my fingers over her clothes, trying to reconcile the woman who wore these elegant blouses and comfortable sweaters with the one who could orchestrate such a calculated departure. The contrast between her careful organization of the children's things, each item labeled, each favorite toy packed, and the casual cruelty of their disappearance felt like a wound that wouldn't heal. Dr. Chin suggested I might be ready for something new, clearing out some of Anna's things, perhaps, or redecorating the kids' rooms. The thought made me physically ill. "They're not dead," I insisted, though the words sounded hollow even to me. "They're just gone." That night, I dreamed of Anna standing in our kitchen, bathed in morning light. But when she turned to face me, her features were blurred, indistinct, like a photograph left too long in the sun. I woke gasping, reaching for a woman who had become as insubstantial as smoke, leaving behind only questions that multiplied in the dark. Spring arrived with a gentleness that felt like mockery. Our garden, once Anna's pride, burst into life without her tending it. The rose bushes she'd planted when Sarah was born bloomed wild and untamed, their fragrance carrying memories of Sunday mornings when we'd watch the kids play while drinking coffee on the porch. Detective Ramirez called with what he considered a breakthrough. Security footage from a gas station in Nevada showed someone who looked like Anna, 2 children in tow, buying supplies. The timestamp placed them there 3 days after they disappeared. I watched the grainy video dozens of times, trying to read meaning into the way she held Tommy's hand, the protective way she guided Sarah through the store. They looked normal, like any family on a road trip. The footage awakened something in me, a realization that had been building slowly, like a storm gathering on the horizon. This wasn't an impulsive act or a cry for help. Every frame of that video showed purpose, calculation. The way she kept her face turned slightly away from the cameras, how she paid in cash, the baseball cap pulled low over her eyes. I found myself standing in her study that evening, really looking at it for the first time in months. The room felt different now, less like a shrine and more like a crime scene. Her laptop still sat on the desk, wiped clean before she left. But she'd missed something. A small notebook wedged behind the radiator, filled with hastily scrawled addresses and phone numbers. Most were unfamiliar, but one caught my eye. A recurring set of digits, marked only with the letter E. Lily's reaction when I showed her the notebook was subtle. A slight tensing of her shoulders. A barely perceptible pause before she spoke. "Maybe it's nothing," she said, but her voice held an undertone I couldn't quite place. Writers keep all sorts of random notes. That night, I dreamed of Anna again. We were in our bedroom, but the walls kept shifting, moving away whenever I tried to reach her. She was speaking, but her words made no sense, a language made of all our broken promises. I woke to find myself clutching her pillow, the fabric damp with tears I didn't remember crying. The next day, I started going through our bank statements again, this time looking for patterns I might have missed. The coffee shop receipts caught my attention, not just their frequency, but their timing. Always on Thursdays, always for amounts that suggested more than one drink. I remembered how she'd insisted Thursdays were her most productive writing days, how she needed that time alone to focus. Dr. Chen noticed a shift in my sessions, how anger had given way to something more analytical. "You're processing differently now," she observed. "Less reactive, more investigative. I feel like I'm excavating my own life," I told her, digging through years of memories, trying to separate truth from fiction. But every answer just leads to more questions. Later that week, I found myself parked outside our old date night restaurant. Anna and I had celebrated our 10th anniversary here, just 2 months before she left. I remembered how distracted she'd seemed that night, checking her phone when she thought I wasn't looking. Now I wondered who she'd been messaging, what secrets had been passing beneath the surface of our celebration. Inside my wallet, I still carried the fortune from my cookie that night. The truth you seek is closer than you think. I'd laughed then, showing it to Anna. She'd smiled too, but there had been something in her eyes, a flicker of what I now recognized as guilt, or perhaps fear. The paper had grown soft with handling, the words barely legible. But they felt different now, charged with new meaning. Summer crept in, marking a full year since they vanished. The children's heights marked on the kitchen door frame seemed to mock me, frozen measurements of growth that would never be updated. Sarah would be taller now. Tommy's baby teeth would have fallen out. These invisible changes haunted me more than the physical absence. The Nevada lead had gone cold, but it sparked something in me. I began mapping their possible route, marking locations where similar sightings had been reported. The wall of my home office became a constellation of pins and strings, each point representing a moment where my family existed without me. Detective Ramirez raised his eyebrows when he saw it, but said nothing. Late one night, scrolling through old photos on Anna's cloud account that she'd forgotten to disconnect, I found something that made my hands shake. A series of pictures from her writing retreats, supposedly solo trips for creative focus. But there, in the background of a coffee shop shot, was a man's reflection in the window. Dark hair, sharp jawline, watching her from a few tables away. The same figure appeared in several photos, always at the edges, always watching. I took the photos to Lily, watching her face carefully as she studied them. The slight widening of her eyes, the way she swallowed before speaking. These tiny betrayals told me she recognized him. "John," she began, her voice soft with something that might have been pity. "Some things, maybe it's better not to know?" But I was past the point of choosing ignorance. That night, I drained a bottle of wine while going through Anna's writing group emails again. The man in the photos matched the description of a new member who joined 6 months before she left. Someone who wrote raw, emotionally charged pieces about breaking free from conventional constraints. The next morning, nursing a hangover and regret, I found myself driving to the community college where Anna had taught creative writing workshops. The department secretary remembered me, her smile faltering when I mentioned Anna's name. "Such a shame," she said, shuffling papers on her desk. She was one of our most popular instructors. The students really connected with her last series on writing through life changes. I sat in my car in the parking lot, remembering how excited Anna had been about teaching that workshop, how she'd stay up late planning lessons, talking about helping people find their authentic voices. Now I wondered if she'd been learning as much as teaching, gathering techniques for rewriting her own story. That evening, a package arrived from Detective Ramirez. Inside was a USB drive containing security footage from various locations along the western seaboard. "Thought you might want to look through these yourself," his note read. "Sometimes fresh eyes see things we miss." Hours bled into dawn as I watched grainy video after video. Gas stations, motels, diners, brief glimpses of my family moving through the world without me. In one clip, Tommy was wearing the Spider-Man backpack I'd given him for his birthday. In another, Sarah's hair was different, cut shorter, like she'd always wanted but Anna had resisted. Each frame felt like a knife twist, showing me how life had continued in my absence. The last video was the clearest, a hotel lobby in Oregon, 2 weeks after they'd left. Anna was checking in, the children half asleep against her legs. But what caught my attention was the way she kept glancing toward the entrance, as if waiting for someone. The timestamp showed 11:47 p.m. At 11:52, a dark figure entered the frame, staying just out of clear view of the cameras. Truth has a way of revealing itself in fragments, like shards of a broken mirror reflecting different angles of the same reality. Mine came together on a rain-soaked Thursday evening, when Lily finally broke her silence. She arrived unannounced, soaked from the storm, clutching a manila envelope. Her hands trembled as she placed it on the kitchen counter. That same counter where Anna and I had shared countless morning coffees, evening wines, midnight confessions. "I can't carry this anymore," Lily said, her voice barely audible above the rain. "Anna made me promise, but you deserve to know." Inside the envelope were photos, dozens of them, spanning the months before Anna's disappearance. Each image felt like a physical blow. Anna and a man I now recognized as Ethan, the writing group member, the figure in the window reflections. They sat close in cafes I knew, walked through parks where our children had played, shared intimate moments in corners of our city I'd never suspected held such secrets. "It started at the writing group," Lily explained, each word seeming to cost her. "He was everything she thought she'd lost, passionate, unpredictable, full of grand ideas about life and art. She said you'd stop seeing her as anything but a wife and mother." The irony felt like acid in my throat. I'd always thought our stability was our strength. Now I understood it had been our undoing. In trying to build a perfect family life, I'd somehow missed the woman at its center slowly disappearing. "The kids I managed," my voice rough. Did she plan to take them from the start?" Lily's silence stretched like a wound. "Ethan had business interests overseas. They talked about starting fresh somewhere new, somewhere they could reinvent themselves. But he kept stalling, making excuses. I don't think he ever meant to." Her voice trailed off, but the implication hung in the air like smoke. Anna had orchestrated her disappearance, believing in a promise that was never meant to be kept. The photos told a story beyond the affair. They revealed the systematic unraveling of our life together. In one, dated 3 months before she left, Anna and Ethan sat in our favorite restaurant, their heads close together over wine glasses. I remembered that night. I'd been home with a sick Tommy, telling her to go enjoy her writing group dinner without me. Another showed them in a park with our children. Sarah was feeding ducks while Tommy rode on Ethan's shoulders. The casual intimacy of it felt like a violation. He'd been infiltrating our family long before they vanished, playing a role in a story I hadn't known was being written. The final photo was the most recent, taken just 2 weeks ago at a small coastal town 3 states away. Anna sat alone on a beach, watching our children play in the distance. Her posture spoke of weariness, of dreams unraveling. There was no sign of Ethan. "She reached out to me last week," Lily admitted, her eyes fixed on the rain-streaked window. "Things aren't. They're not what she thought they'd be." Ethan stopped returning her calls months ago. She's been moving from place to place, using the money she saved, trying to figure out what to do next. The rage I'd expected to feel didn't come. Instead, there was a strange, hollow ache for Anna, for our children, for the life we'd built and lost. I thought of her alone in some strange city, carrying the weight of a decision that had destroyed multiple lives, watching our children grow up in the shadow of her choices. That night, after Lily left, I sat in the darkness of our bedroom, surrounded by the whispers of a life I thought I understood. The photos lay scattered across the bed, paper ghosts of moments stolen from me. Outside, the rain continued its steady rhythm, matching the hollow beating of my heart. I found myself touching each image, not with anger, but with a strange, aching curiosity. Here was Anna laughing at something Ethan said, her head thrown back in a way I hadn't seen in years. There she was, watching him interact with our children, her expression a complex mixture of hope and guilt. Each photo revealed a woman I both knew intimately and didn't recognize at all. Sleep eluded me. In the early hours of morning, I drove to the beach where we'd spent our last family vacation. The pre-dawn air carried the same salt-heavy scent I remembered from that trip. Tommy had been afraid of the waves then, clinging to my neck as we ventured into the surf. Sarah had collected shells, presenting them to Anna like precious gems. We'd been happy, or at least, I thought we were. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message was simple, "I'm sorry." Then another, "The kids miss you." My hands shook as I typed back, "Are they safe?" The response came quickly, "Yes, always." That was never in question. Sitting in my car, watching the sun rise over the ocean, I thought about the Anna I'd fallen in love with, the young writer with dreams bigger than our small college town could contain. Somewhere along the way, I'd stopped seeing her dreams, focused instead on building the life I thought we should have. Security, stability, a beautiful cage. Detective Ramirez called later that morning. They'd traced the recent photo to a small coastal town in Oregon. "Do you want us to bring them in?" he asked, his voice gentle. "There are legal options." The question hung in the air like smoke. I thought of Sarah and Tommy, already traumatized by months of uncertainty. The idea of adding police and courts to their confusion felt like another kind of betrayal. "Let me talk to her first," I said. I spent the day in Anna's study, reading through her old journals with new understanding. Between accounts of daily life and writing notes, I found the breadcrumbs of her unraveling, subtle at first, then increasingly desperate. Sometimes I look at John and wonder if he remembers the girl who wanted to write novels in Paris. One entry read, "The one who talked about adventures and taking risks. Have I become so comfortable that I've disappeared?" As evening approached, another text arrived. "The kids are in bed. Can we talk?" My response surprised me with its steadiness. "Where are you?" The address she sent was for a small rental cottage near the ocean. The same one from the last photo. I booked a flight for the next morning, feeling strangely calm. Not forgiveness. I wasn't ready for that, but something else. Understanding, perhaps, or at least the beginning of it. That night, I wrote 2 letters I never intended to send. One to the man who'd promised Anna an escape from the life that was suffocating her, then left her to navigate the aftermath alone. The other to the version of myself who'd been too busy building a perfect life to notice it crumbling from within. The Oregon morning broke through fog, painting the world in watercolor shades of gray and blue. The cottage stood alone against the backdrop of churning waves, weather-worn and small. Nothing like the life we'd built together. My rental car's tires crunched on the shell-strewn driveway as I pulled up, and for a moment, I sat there, watching sea birds wheel against the pearl-white sky. The door opened before I could knock. Anna stood in the threshold, changed yet achingly familiar. Her hair was shorter, touched with strands of gray I didn't remember. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, telling stories of sleepless nights and heavy regrets. Behind her, I could hear the sounds of cartoons, the occasional burst of children's laughter that made my heart constrict. "They don't know you're coming," she said softly. I wasn't sure. The sentence hung unfinished between us, heavy with all our broken promises. I nodded, understanding flooding my chest like cold water. She stepped aside, letting me enter the space where my family had existed without me for so long. The reunion with Sarah and Tommy blurred through tears, their small bodies crashing into mine, their voices overlapping with questions and exclamations. They seemed both older and impossibly young, changed in ways that made my chest ache. Sarah's missing front tooth, Tommy's longer limbs, physical manifestations of time I couldn't reclaim. Later, after they'd exhausted themselves with stories and excitement, falling asleep on the worn couch, Anna and I sat at her small kitchen table. The same table from the photos. I realized steam rose from our coffee cups, creating shifting veils between us. Ethan was a fantasy, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Not just the affair, everything he represented. Freedom, adventure, a life without responsibilities. But fantasies don't hold up in daylight. I watched her hands wrap around her cup, knuckles white with tension. "When did you know?" I asked, surprised by the gentleness in my voice. That he wasn't coming? Or that I'd made a terrible mistake? She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. They happened at different times. Ethan faded away gradually, like a photograph left in the sun. But understanding what I'd done to you, to us, to the kids, that hit me all at once about 3 months in. By then, it felt too late to turn back. The truth settled between us like dust after a storm. We talked until the sky darkened, about missed signs and unspoken needs, about the comfort that had become suffocation, about dreams abandoned and resentments nursed in silence. Each word felt like lifting a stone from a wall we'd built between us over years. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said as night fell, watching our sleeping children's faces in the dim light. "But I understand more than I did yesterday." She nodded, tears tracking silently down her cheeks. "I don't know if I can forgive myself," she whispered. "But the kids need both of us. Not perfect versions of us. Just us trying our best to be better than we were." We stayed up until dawn, planning and talking. Not about reconciliation. That bridge was too thoroughly burned, but about co-parenting, about helping our children heal from the wounds we'd inflicted. About finding a way forward that honored both the love we'd shared and the pain we'd caused. As the sun rose over the ocean, painting the world in new light, I watched Anna making breakfast for our children, her movements both familiar and strange. The future stretched before us, uncertain, but somehow less threatening than before. We were no longer the people who had fallen in love, nor the ones who had hurt each other so deeply. We were something else now, survivors of our own mistakes, trying to build something new from the ashes of what we'd burned. If you enjoy the story, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Have a nice day, and see you soon.